Good morning, Ajahn. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the BSV Sunday Dhamma talk, and also welcome to our online audience as well. So this morning we've got Ajahn Sādaro giving us the Dhamma talk, and Ajahn will be having our announcements at 10:45, so end of Q&A is 10:45.
I can do that.
Okay, now I'll pass it to Savitri to address the precepts.
Mayam Bante, Tisarnena Saha Pancha Silani Yachama, Dutiyampi Mayam Bante, Tisarnena Saha Pancha Silani Yachama, Tatiyampi Mayam Bante, Tisarnena Saha Pancha Silani Yachama.
Okay, so anybody that'd like to take the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, you're more than welcome to. You can just repeat after me. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Tutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tisarana gamanang nittitang. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinādāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kāmesu micchācārā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musāvādā veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Suramerya majjapamadatthāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Imani pancha sikkhapadani silena sukadinyanti silena bhoga sampada silena nipputinyanti dasamma silang visotaye. Okay, so now we'll just chant the recollection of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. If anybody would like to chant along, we'll just do this in Pali. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijjacharana sampanno sukhato lokavitu anuttaro purisa dhammasara Tādeva manusanang buddho bhagavati Sawakato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko Hibasiko opanayiko pachatang veditapo vinyuhiti Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Ujjupatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Nyayapatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho. Samicchipatipanno bhagavato sāvaka Goyadidang Chattari Purisa Yugani Atta Purisa Pugalam Esa Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Punya Ketang Lokasati. So we'll do the Metta Sutta now. We can just do this in English. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be happy. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, and to be born. May all beings be happy. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami ito parang sakajang dhammo sotapoti. Okay, good stuff. Good morning, everyone. How are we all? Good, nice. So for the people that came and did the one-day retreat yesterday, I am just basically going to be repeating a lot of what I said yesterday. So you're going to know all the answers, or you're going to know all the non-answers, and you're just going to go, oh, you just basically said the same thing yesterday. So I apologize to the people that were actually here yesterday. You're basically going to hear the same thing again. So, for the benefit of those that weren't here yesterday, though, what I'm going to be talking about today is something that I'm just always been interested in, and I think is a really important question is what is the self? Now, because we all have ideas about what the self actually is. If you ask basically anybody in existence, they'll have an idea about what the self is. They have their own view about what the self is. And if you're a Buddhist, you have ideas about the self as well. If you're a Buddhist, you basically sort of say that there is no self. So just as a quick show of hands, who thinks which one of these is actually like right or true? Do we have a self or do we have no self? So for self, do we have a self? Yeah? People that were here yesterday? Huh? Do we have no self? Yeah, more people are on the no self side of things. So generally from a Buddhist perspective, we think that there's no self, but does anybody know what the Buddha actually said about either self or not self? Or no self? Yeah? No. Yeah. So yeah, there's that, but what did he say about the self? I think what most people maybe are not actually aware of, that the Buddha actually refused to answer this question. So if he was asked point blank whether there was a self or there was no self, he was asked by somebody called Vajrakota the Wanderer. You find this in the Samyutta Nikaya. Whether there was a self or there was no self, he actually just refused to answer this, basically. And he was asked why he refused to answer it. He said, well, if I say that there is a self, then what I'm doing is committing myself to a position called eternalism, where basically the self is constant over time, because he's taking on a metaphysical view of the self. But if he says there's no self, he's committing himself to what's called a nihilism. So basically the self finishes after death. So the Buddha actually didn't really say that there's a self or there's no self. But what does that do for us in our day-to-day existence? That's very, this is not stating this position is fine when we're thinking about metaphysical views, when we're thinking about analytical arguments about the thing. But yeah, what about our day-to-day existence of actually having a self? So what I'd like for us to try to do today, just try. You don't have to do it. You just try to do it. Any kind of ideas that you have about not self, park it outside, put it in the mailbox. Put it in the mailbox for today, and you can go and pick it up again on your way out. That's all fine. But what I would like to try to do today is just to try to elucidate and clarify and get into more what we experience as a self. Again, we can sort of park a lot of the positions about what is or what is not a self. But what's nice to try to get is what is our actual experience of a self. And so to do that though, let's sort of ask some questions. It's well, what do we actually think a self is then? Yeah?
Are the typical ways we respond to things, like our behavior patterns maybe?
Yeah.
Five aggregates in the Buddhist sense?
Yep. So we'd say the self is the way we respond to things, our behavior patterns, our basically habits, yeah?
An idea that we have about ourselves.
Like an idea that we have about ourselves, yeah? Okay.
Anything a sentence that starts with I am?
Anything a sentence that starts with I am, yeah? Anybody else? A label, yeah, it can be a label. A kind of personality, so your kind of character traits that you might have, particular, yeah?
I'm trying to remember a yoga definition,
Mm.
which might be the awareness abiding in its own nature.
Awareness abiding in its own nature, yeah, yeah, yep. Mind and senses. And so a memory of something whenever. Yeah, good. So look, we can think about the self in all these different kinds of ways. Everyone has a little bit of a different interpretation of the self. So it's really important that if we're going to take on the not self position, you get really clear what you mean by the self. You have to get clear on that first before you can actually go about denying that the thing actually exists. So, say for example, if you're trying to prove Santa exists, is there any children? There's one upstairs. Okay, just stop. Block your children's ears. So if we're trying to prove Santa exists, right? Okay. So what do we mean by Santa? Do we mean like the fat guy that goes down to Chadstone Shopping Centre in December and dresses up in a costume and sits there and takes photos? Is that what we mean by Santa? That guy exists. That guy exists. So we're not really talking about that Santa. What we're talking about is this guy that's in the North Pole that has a factory of elves that makes all these toys, and he has these magical reindeers, and the magical reindeers fly around the world and give presents to children every Christmas, and he does this in the space of one day. This is the Santa that we're talking about. So as long as we're clear about what Santa we're talking about when we're talking about whether Santa exists or doesn't exist, we just have to know that. Again, we're not talking about the guy down at the mall. We're talking about the guy in the North Pole, right? Now, cool, so that's super easy to do with Santa. It's fine, but doing that with the self is really, really difficult. So there's this, if we want to deny something exists, we have to know exactly what that thing is itself. And so this is why, again, if we look at what the Buddhist or the Buddha actually said about it, he didn't say anything about it. So it's we're sort of a little bit lost when we're thinking about this. And so this is why actually I think a lot of later Indian philosophers were really useful in this area. When we look at somebody like Tsongkhapa in the 15th century, he had this idea of having identifying the object of negation. And so essentially what Tsongkhapa's position is if you're going to say something doesn't exist, you have to be very, very, very clear about that thing that you think doesn't exist. So you have to get very clear on that thing from the get-go. You can't just say the thing doesn't exist without actually clarifying the thing that you're talking about. Again, it's like saying Santa doesn't exist, but it's well, hang on, there's a Santa down at the mall. Again, if we're not clear about what we're talking about, then it's very hard for us to negate the identification of that thing. And so Tsongkhapa actually builds on another ancient Buddhist philosopher called Chandrakirti, and he gets at this, he has this really nice analogy of the kind of problem that we're facing. He likens it, and Chandrakirti was around the 7th century. Chandrakirti had this idea or made this argument that basically just say if you're at home and you have a snake in your wall. You're at home, you've got a snake in your wall and you're worried about the snake that's in your wall. But if you start going, well, okay, this is all, I'm worried about the snake that's in my wall, but I'm sitting here in this room and it's fine, and there's no elephant in this room. Now, we don't have to worry about imaginary elephants. What we need to worry about is the snake that's in the room, that's in the wall, sorry. So this idea is we don't want to be talking about imaginary elephants. We want to be worried about the snake that's in the wall. That's what we really want to be getting at when we're thinking about these things that are ideas around the self. So I think, unfortunately, what we get a lot of the times when we're thinking, and again, from some really great, sophisticated philosophical arguments, when we're looking at maybe the science and the psychology of the self, even when we're talking about common sense understandings of what the self is. And look, like dare I say it, but a lot of religious interpretations of what the self is. A lot of the time, at least just in my opinion, I think what we're talking about is imaginary elephants. We're not talking about the snake that's in the wall. So we overlook the snake in the wall because we think we're okay. We're talking about an imaginary elephant. So what I think is the most important thing for us to think about when we're trying to define the self is to look into our own experience of how we experience this sense of self. This is the most important thing, because this is something that all of us actually have, whether you're Buddhist, you're not Buddhist, whether you're whatever kind of culture or history or background that you're actually from. This is the kind of thing that we all have, and I think this is something we can all share, and we can all maybe even agree on to some extent. Now, okay, so what is this self that is in our experience? Now, I'm going to rely on somebody called Jay Garfield. He makes these he has these very good kind of thought experiments, and probably Jay Garfield is probably one of the most clearest persons on this question. He's a contemporary Buddhist philosopher. I recommend his new book, Losing Ourselves. Sorry, really good book. Very, very clear on it. But he gives us these kinds of thought experiments to get at what we're talking about when we're talking about a self. Now, and then there's another thought experiment that I'll give you that maybe sort of captures what we're talking about. So Jay asks the question of, well, can you imagine yourself having somebody else's body? The Olympics is on, yeah. So what's the really good gymnast? Caitlin Ohashi, is that her name? Simone. I don't follow Olympics. I have no. So can you imagine yourself having somebody else's Simone or Simone Biles. Okay, so Simone Biles. Can you imagine yourself having Simone Biles' body? Can you at least imagine it? Yeah, I'm not saying you have to have it. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine yourself inhabiting Simone Biles' body and being able to have that kind of motor muscle memory and being able to do that? Just imagine it. Again, thought experiment, just imagining the thing. Yeah? Yeah? So you can imagine yourself in somebody else's body. So what this actually says is that the thing that we take to be a self is, we can imagine having another body, but that isn't ourselves. So we're not really what we see as the self is not really the body. We can imagine having somebody else's body, but that's not ourself, right? Yeah? We'll basically agree on that? Yeah? You can at least imagine it. You can't at least imagine it at all? Okay, fine. That's fine. That's fine. Again, it's a thought experiment. So let's maybe extend that now to the mind. Mind, thoughts, memories, all these kinds of things. Can you imagine having somebody else's kind of thought patterns, their memories? Can you imagine at least, having the kind of mathematical abilities of a John Nash? Can you imagine yourself having the kind of analytic reasoning qualities of an Aristotle? Can you imagine yourself having like the wisdom of a Sariputta? Can you at least imagine this thing? Again, thought experiment. Can you at least imagine that? That you maybe have the kind of cognitive capacities of what's his name? Magnus Carlsen, to be able to play chess in a particular kind of way? Can you imagine at least having that kind of ability? Yeah? There's some nods, yeah? Hands are good because I can't see nods, yeah? Good, okay. So what this says about the mind and our kind of mental faculties as well, or our psychology, is like, again, we can imagine ourselves having these other minds or mental faculties in this kind of way. So this means that we can imagine ourselves having a mind, but that we're not that mind. So we can imagine ourselves having that thing, so we're not that thing. And so these two positions actually map quite well onto the Buddhist understanding of what the self is or is not. When we think about what the self is or is not from a Buddhist perspective, a traditional Buddhist perspective, we say it's the self is not the physical form, the rupa, the form, but it's also not the other four mental aggregates, the Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana. So it's not the mind or the psychological aspects, or it's not the body either. So these two things map onto that. So we can imagine ourselves either inhibiting someone else's body, or we can imagine ourselves inhibiting someone else's mind, but that doesn't mean the self is either of those two things. You might happily swap with a gymnast's body for a while to go, oh, isn't it cool to do a backflip, or all well and good. But now let's sort of extend that a little bit further. And this is from a kind of thought experiment by somebody called Thomas Nagel. It's quite famous, and it's the kind of the problem or the issue around what it's like to be something else. So can you imagine yourself having somebody else's conscious experience? Can you imagine yourself having somebody else's consciousness? That's a harder one, yeah? Yeah. Because what happens if you have somebody else's consciousness?
I think it's kind of easy because consciousness doesn't have much of a feeling to it. Just when you're aware of stuff, you just know stuff. It's sort of this feeling, which may be a dog or something, or anything has as well.
Yep.
Like this value-free, sort of tasteless, sort of, like when you let go of things as they come up, it's just this being aware.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again,
So with the dog though, if you can imagine being the dog,
just watching or whatever, being aware
well,
of what's around you.
most people would sort of say it's like, well, if you have the consciousness of a dog, you are now the dog. You are not yourself anymore. So if I were to switch over into a dog's consciousness and have a dog's consciousness, I'm not me anymore. I'm a dog. I can never be a dog.
Isn't consciousness a bit non-self?
Yeah, a little bit. So essentially, we can never really imagine ourselves being another consciousness unless you take this kind of, consciousness is a unification kind of view of consciousness, that consciousness is everything, or basically a panpsychist kind of view.
Body, like Ajahn Sādaro,
Yeah. Fine. Yeah, again, so you can imagine that, it's fine. So, but let's just, for the sake of argument, I think most people think, well, I can never actually have somebody else's consciousness. You can't have my consciousness. I can't have your consciousness. So if I were to go, well, I'm going to switch with a dog forever, what does that mean for me? That I'm gone, that I'm now a dog. So it's this kind of what we think, at least, again, this is all just kind of, we're just trying to get at this explanation of the self. So what I at least think, or what I would at least define the self as this kind of identification with a particular and unique conscious experience. I'm having the particular and unique conscious experience that I'm having now, so that makes me me. If that goes and I become a dog, I'm not me anymore, I'm a dog. So now we sort of get at at least what I think, at least, of this is what we mean when we're talking about a self. That we're identifying with this particular and unique conscious experience. Again, it's not the mind, again, it's not the body, but we're identifying with this conscious experience. It's this idea that somehow we're a subject of experience. We're a subject that in some way knows things out in the world, knows objects. So again, it knows the body, it knows these the cognitive faculties that we have, it knows things out in the world. But it is this kind of subjective identification with experience. And so this is what I think most people mean when we talk about when we have a self. So there's that idea there that we, in some way, that we are the subject that acts on the world. I am me, and I can sort of move my body, and I can move my arms, and I'm the sort of the subject of experience, and I can do all these things, and I make decisions. These thoughts pop into my head, and I can decide to do one thing, or I can decide to do another thing. So it's this kind of feeling that essentially I think it's a kind of feeling that we have that we are that we are identifying with experience as it is. We could say in some kind of way it's this idea that we're like an ego behind everything else. We have this kind of ego that we have, that we're this like the center of our conscious experience, and we're having this experience. So there's this idea there's something about that doesn't change. Now okay, so do you think now, you're sitting here right now, what time is it? Like 10 o'clock? Maybe,
Yeah,
about 10 o'clock, perfect. It's 10 o'clock, maybe you got here at like 9 o'clock. Are you the same person that walked through the door at 9 o'clock to now? Not really, there's aspects of it that have changed, but so are you a totally different person now? You're not really a totally different person either, right? So you're not really the same person, but you're not really someone different. But you'd say, I still feel like the same person. Like, I'm still the same person that walked through the door. It wasn't somebody else. It wasn't an alien that inhabited my body at that time, and I now have just woken up and I am a new person. We have this kind of, you can even go as far back as like childhood. As childhood, I gave the example yesterday. Is like, so when I was a kid, like I loved Transformers. I thought Transformers were awesome, and this is 1980s Transformers. This is not like modern. What's his name? Michael Bay. Not Michael Bay Transformers. It's like, this is cartoon Transformers, and you had little things, and I thought Transformers were awesome. I thought Transformers were the best things in the universe, and if I could do anything and be anybody, I'd be a Transformer. I obviously don't think that anymore. But in some way, I still identify with that kid that liked Transformers. I still think I'm the same person. I'm the same kind of essence in that kind of way. Again, that essence of a kid liking a Transformer, it's not like that's not me at all. There's a continuity there. So there's like a continuity of identity that we sort of take to be this essence, that we usually attribute that thing is us, that thing is me, that thing is myself. It's this idea that, when you maybe other people that you work with, you put on a particular kind of personality and they know you in a particular way. It's like, well, that's not the real me. That's not really who I am. So I think when we think about this, this subject of experience, this identifier with this identifier with the unique conscious experience, I think that's what we mean when we talk about having a self. Again, that's just my definition. You can disagree with it. I'm totally fine with that. And so now, when we get to the Buddhist position, basically the Buddhists would say that, well, that is a myth. That thing is as mythological as Santa Claus. Yeah? This subject of experience, that this thing is just as mythical, just as illusory, just as much of an idea as what Santa Claus actually is. So what is now not self then? What is Santa? Self is hard. Let's think about Santa. Santa's easier. So we're taking for granted that there's this me that has this kind of essence that acts and thinks and has this particular kind of unique experience. But from the Buddhist perspective, what the Buddhist perspective would say is that, this is just a misrepresentation of reality. This is just an understanding that's arising from what we call avidya. From a Buddhist perspective, we would say even that feeling that we have of being an identifier with conscious experience, that thing is just illusory, that thing is just a process, that thing just comes about because we have experience of our body, our feelings, our sanya, our memories and perceptions, our sankharas, the thoughts, our mental activity, and our sense consciousness. It's all sort of like binding together, and it seems continuous over time, that we attach to that and we identify that, and that thing becomes our self. And again, because we're having this experience and we're having this sort of bounded interrelation of these different factors, we sort of take ourselves to be the center of that. Because we have conscious experience, we identify as the center of that experience. So, but what Buddhism essentially says is, if something is constantly changing, if it's anicca, if it's constantly impermanent, then that thing can't be satisfactory. You know, can't give you any kind of satisfaction in some kind of way. It's dukkha. And if something is always constantly changing and it's unsatisfactory, this is something that, you know, essentially we can't really control. We can't make it one way or the other. So, you know, essentially what that thing is just a natural process. What we experience as consciousness is just a natural process dependent on causes and conditions. You know, I am here now because I'm not under anesthesia. You know, I'm experiencing now, I'm not under anesthesia. So I'm having an experience now. I experience existence now, I have consciousness now because of particular kinds of causes and conditions, the biological integration of my mother and my father, and gave rise to this body that actually has the cognitive faculties to be able to experience things. Essentially, Buddhists would say this is just a natural process. So this is this idea that what we take to be a self is just a natural series of processes of causes and condition. So what the Buddhist position actually encourages us to do is really, again, not take either one of these things on, not take on that the self is true or that not self is true. What the Buddhist position is encouraging us to do is to really examine our experience. When we look at how the Buddha taught, and especially when he taught something like not self, did he basically just say, monks, not self is true, deal with it? If anybody looks at the Anatalakkhana Sutta, like what he asks is like, monks, can you see a self in the body? No. Can you see a self in feelings? No. Essentially, it's this process of trying to look for a self in our experience, as opposed to going, well, there's nothing there. Remember, the Buddha didn't say that there was a self or there was no self. So I think this is the way that we should maybe start to think about what the self is and what maybe not self is. And so, again, if we sort of bring it back to Santa, like what are we? You know, are we the Santa in the North Pole? Well, no. But maybe we're the mall Santa. Maybe we're just like a character. Maybe we're something that's dressed up as Santa, but that's not really Santa. I don't know. I'm just saying. Yeah. So, in some way, we can maybe see that what we are is a kind of character. What we are is a kind of fiction. If you, say for example, if you go to watch like a play or something, you go to see like Hamlet or something. You go to see the characters. You don't go to see the actor. You know, there's no use of like somebody going, cool, I'm going to go and watch Hamlet, but the actor that's on the stage just acts like themselves. It's like, well, that's not the play. This is not what I'm after. So there's this idea that what we're doing is we're essentially acting like characters that are a self. But what we are is not that thing. It's kind of an illusion. It's kind of a fiction. Now, the tricky thing about fictions is fictions become facts. Things that are fictitious become a factual thing. What do I mean by that? This is sort of strange, but okay, so you think about a piece of literary fiction, and for me, the one that comes to mind is Dostoevsky's, like the Brothers Karamazov. Anyone know it? No? Bad example then. Bad example there. Work of fiction. Star Wars. Star Wars. Everyone knows Star Wars. Everyone knows Star Wars. So we have a work of fiction. And there's I'm so bad with Star Wars. I shouldn't have picked Star Wars. Luke Skywalker, and you have Darth Vader, and you have too many characters there. It doesn't work. So essentially, if I say, well, okay, like Luke Skywalker, Luke Skywalker was an Australian. Luke Skywalker was an Australian, and he liked playing poker. You'd actually say, well, no, like Luke Skywalker's a Jedi. So, in some way, this fiction has become a fact in your mind. Again, if I say Luke Skywalker's an Australian, you're like, no, he's not Australian. He's from, I don't know where the guy's from. He was from some little island, some little planet, I don't know. But you basically say he's a Jedi. So these things, even those things that are fictional, can become a fact. So it's not about whether something is fictional or whether it's a fact, whether something is real or something is untrue. It's about the way that we're relating to this thing. So it's not really a question of whether the self is true and right or not self is true and right. It's about how we're actually relating to this thing. It's about how we're either relating to the character or we're relating to the actor. It's about how we're relating to the myth of Santa or the Santa down at the mall. We can relate to these things in either a useful and healthy way or an unuseful and unhealthy way. So say, for example, with the self, we can relate to it in a healthy way, in a useful way. What's one way we could relate to the self in a useful way? If we think, well, I want to work towards enlightenment. I want to develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, and I want to essentially become enlightened. I want to become a Sotapanna. I want to develop the Brahma Viharas. I want to develop the faculties of the jhanas. I want to develop all these kinds of things. This is relating to the self in a useful and healthy way. But if we relate to the self in an unuseful and not useful and unhealthy way, when we can maybe think it's like, well, I'm terrible. Nobody likes me. I just keep I keep doing all the wrong kind of things. I'll never get any better. This is relating to the self in an unhealthy way. But it can also be the same with not self. We can relate to not self in either a healthy way or an unhealthy way. We can relate to not self in a very good and healthy way by thinking it's like, well, everything I am is just a kind of process. So when I get angry at other people out in the world, look, it's a whole bunches of causes and conditions, and this idea that I'm angry, this is just a shifting and changing amorphous things that's arising in consciousness. So this is, in one way, it's a healthy way to relate to not self. But again, we can take not self in an unhealthy way or a not useful way. We can sort of think, well, everything's not self, so it's fine. I can do whatever I want to people. I can just be nasty to people. I can be uncaring, unkind, because it's all just not self. It's all fine. We can, obviously, this is taking not self in the wrong kind of way. This is building a kind of apathetic attitude towards existence. This is not self in a unhealthy way. We can also see there's all these different kinds of psychopathologies that we might have: depersonalization, derealization, where we feel like we don't have a sense of self, but it's very negatively valenced. It's very impairing to our functioning. Cotard syndrome, all these kinds of things. So we can relate to either self or not self in a useful or an unuseful way. And again, so what it's about is really just questioning, how am I relating to these two things? How am I relating to the self and not self? Am I treating myself as a character, not an actor? Am I treating myself as either Santa from the North Pole or Santa from the mall? How are we actually relating to this? I think this is more the important thing. So now there's sort of probably enough of me kind of monologuing about this, but it's just to sort of say that if we really want to take a position seriously, like not self, it's very, very important that we get clear on what we think the self actually is. And again, we know that maybe the self is not the body, that maybe the self is not the mind. But, you know, at least in my interpretation, you know, what I think the self is this identification with a unique consciousness. I can't have your consciousness, you can't have his consciousness. I can't have a bat's consciousness, that's the Nagel example. Consciousness, the identification with a consciousness basically changes who we are. So for me, the identification with a conscious experience, that is the thing that I think is the self. And again, from the Buddhist perspective, we're saying that, you know, this identification, this is just kind of a myth. This is all it is like a natural series of processes. So yeah, so with that, that's sort of my thoughts on that kind of thing. I'd be interested to hear everybody else's thoughts on it.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the talk.
That's okay.
Now we come to question time. We alternate the question between in the room and also online. Yeah, we start with the room.
Yep.
Thank you, Bhante, for a very confusing, complicated problem.
I like confusing people. So
Anyway, that's good. Can talk length or this dissect this way or that way. The view of self, we can say how it has come into us. There are three explanations. The Buddhist explanation, the secular explanation, a scientific explanation, and the theistic explanation. The Buddhist explanation is that avijja paccaya sankhara, because the wrong view, you're born as somebody, it's all start from the wrong view. It can go on that dependent origination and so forth. The theistic view is that God creates a man and breathes into his view and creates a soul. That's the Christian and the theistic view. The secular view, the scientific view, is that it's a part of evolutionary process. And in the process of evolution, every being has got in the system, DNA or whatever, that everything to survive and for the survival of the species. And that's what it is. And there's no better way than putting this chip in the DNA to say that this is self or in your psyche so that you protect your being. So it's a very scientific expression, is this view of self is for your protection. You and your species. That is how the self-view starts at the point. We can easily solve this by taking the Buddha's approach. When the Buddha got enlightened and all the other arhats, they only realized what it was really, the whole game. And then he came down to teach all the other beings who are here because of a view of self. If he said that there's no self, the argument is finished. And nobody is going to work on it. So he didn't say, that's why he didn't say there is no self. Right? All the four noble truths and the Noble Eightfold Path is directed to people who has an idea that there's a self. And when you progress in this path, gradually, then only you yourself realize that this is only an illusion. But no one can tell you that. It's a realization. That's exactly what Buddha did. When as I said last time, when Gautama Buddha he practiced thoroughly and diligently with this instruction from teachers, and in the process of seeking the truth, he found that there was no seeker. That is called enlightenment. That's called nibbana. When they found that there's no seeker. It's not that he attained seeker. When he found there's no seeker, that's nibbana, right? So I think the whole practice as a Buddhist is to find out how this view of self is found. And once you realize that the view of self is an illusion, and that's all in the Buddhist teachings of dependent origination and 5 grades of arising. It's all there. And then that is the way to go. I mean, if we try to psychoanalyze this, it will never be right for those who are, some people have a very strong view of self, some people have a very weak view of self, depending on how well you are training. So that is the game.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. And it's like, I think there's something there. It's like, yeah, the idea is to investigate the thing. Investigate the thing that we take to be a self, and that really is the practice. And it is through actually that investigating this thing that we think is a self and think is experiences, like we'll find something else out. Again, I don't want to land on sort of like either way that, but if you look into the thing, you know, what do you find? So if you look into the self, what do you actually find there? And as you said, you know, the Buddha you know, essentially finds that there is no seeker. So I think, you know, you know, that really is like the practice. That's what we're trying to do. For me, that's what I've spent my most of my existence doing, trying to look into my experience to find what this thing actually is. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's an element there. It's like, yeah, we have to look into this thing that we either think is a self or this thing that we think is not self as well. Again, just look into the thing, experience it, and then what do you find? And that's you could say like the magic of the path. That's the magic of the path, the Buddha's path. What do you find when you look into this thing? So yeah, I think I totally agree with that. That's sort of our job as practitioners. That's the task as a practitioner. Look into that thing. Again, if we remember the Anatalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha said, like, look into that thing. Look into that thing that we think is a self. Is it the body? Is it the feeling? Is it the sanya, sankhara? Look into those things. Can you find a self within that? So it is this element of looking into experience to see if we can find the thing. And that's for me, that's the most important thing. And I always, you know, for me, it's a like a lifelong process. It's something I can just continue to keep doing. I think, and it's for me, it's fun. You know, like that's the main thing for me. So yeah, very good. Yeah.
Hi, Ajahn.
Yep.
This online question. What happened when the mind suddenly recognizes that itself, the world structure I have believed in, is somehow delusional, such as not real? So also add on a note for that is a question is not to taken too seriously. The person asking question is more interested in the answer, is more lighthearted than serious.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. But can you repeat the question? I sort of missed.
Sure.
What the question was.
Yeah. What happened when the mind suddenly recognizes that itself, and the world structure I have believed in somehow delusional, such as not real?
Yep. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, muck around with the idea, play around with the idea. But so I just say like just try it and see what happens. Now, saying that though, I should like throw some caveats on this. You know, we can have these kinds of experiences and it can be very negatively valenced. You have to be careful. Some people, it can throw them into a kind of pit of existential despair. So you do have to be very careful. I think we need the right kind of requisite qualities before we go sort of like delving into this thing. So it's not like somebody comes through the door on and have never meditated before, and you go, well, there's no self in the center of your experience, and there's no control over anything, and it might sort of throw them in a tailspin. So I think it's something that if we build up the right requisite qualities, it can be a very profound experience. So, and I think essentially it's probably different for the way that we relate to that is probably different for different people. So, yeah, I don't want to say, I don't really want to say what it's like or not like, because I think it's it's something to be experienced for oneself, and whenever one does build up the right requisite conditions to do that, then it'll change the way that you actually relate to experience. So yeah, that's sort of the offhanded, lighthearted version of that. It could lead to existential dread. That's the lighthearted version of that.
Thank you, Ajahn. Any question from the room?
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk,
That's cool.
Ajahn.
That's cool.
My sort of question or seeking clarification is you spoke of the personality or the self as what we identify with. So I tend to think of our likes and dislikes.
Yep.
You'll be meditating or something, and then it might come up these petty things, or they said this, or like our self-orientation. And I think even when a person, say, awakened, hypothetically, they'd still have this. You can't be really totally free of this, but the idea is to sort of use it as a strategy and let go of sort of this unskillful stuff that arises. Even I think the Buddha said when a person's awakened, they'll have this residue remaining of subtle likes and dislikes, and so is that more or less in the ballpark?
I think so, yeah, because it sort of seems, strange to say that even if one has let go or abandoned identification with the self, that that no more that you couldn't make a decision anymore, that you couldn't. This would sort of be like saying, this individual has built up a language and they've built up a whole language. They speak English, and now they're because they don't identify with anything in experience, that now all the English that they have goes out the window. There's still the causes and conditions of that person being born in a particular society, speaking English, would still, after they're enlightened, still have English-speaking capacities and English-speaking cognitive abilities. So I think obviously those kinds of things still have to, while those causes and conditions are still there, they still have to operate in that kind of way. So decisions, preferences. It's not like somebody that's an arahant would just go, well, I hated watermelon my whole life, and now I love watermelon. It's they wouldn't really do that, because they have a particular kind of cognitive makeup, they have a particular kind of biological makeup. So yeah, I don't think it would change any. Essentially, if you're thinking about it from the Buddhist perspective, the five khandhas don't change. The five khandhas still operate in the same kind of way. Whereas again, the identification with the khandhas is something different. So yeah, all those things would still be there. So yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So I heard this talk the other day. I'm wondering if it fits with the general Buddhist tradition here.
Yep.
Ajahn Amaro was saying that sort of our personality can never become enlightened, because it's this personality, it's these likes and dislikes and so on. But the mind, like the citta or the consciousness, can become enlightened into the nature of being a person. So like seeing these things come and go.
Yeah.
So even these great ajahns and so on, they'll have these things arising and passing, but it's this not identifying, not getting caught up with them.
Yeah.
That's sort of the main sort of point of the practice, identifying with this, knowing what's going on, but not like getting overly involved in and say, chasing this down or really wanting this, and separation from.
Yeah. So I think I agree in principle, but we also have to be conceptually very cautious as well, in that if we think that the citta is something, that the citta is something beyond the aggregates, then we're actually falling into a kind of dualism as well. We're essentially saying that there's something beyond the five aggregates that can be enlightened. So we just sort of have to conceptually, again, I'm just saying conceptually, in principle I sort of agree in this way, but conceptually we have to be very careful that there is something external outside the chitta, and the chitta is the thing that becomes, you know, enlightened, because this is the kind of Thai forest tradition understanding of the chitta and the aggregates. So yeah, the personality is part of the 5 aggregates, but the chitta is the thing that becomes enlightened. So actually this is maybe not so commensurate with like a kind of traditional Buddhist interpretation that there's something beyond the 5 aggregates. You know, the Buddha basically said it's just the aggregates, it's just dependent origination. There's not another thing there. So yeah, it's conceptually, it's actually a very tricky one. We just have to be careful when we're thinking of that there's the 5 aggregates and then there's the chitta, because that's leading to a kind of dualism, that there's the aggregates and this other thing that's the chitta, where I'm not so sure that the Buddha was emphasizing that. And look, it's, you know, we can, there's different ideas about that. So, but in principle, I think this idea that, well, yeah, the personality can never become enlightened. It's, you know, but it's the non-identification with the personality that could, you know, you could maybe say that's the kind of enlightened state. But yeah, you know, that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion of it. So yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Yep.
A question from Richard.
Yep.
As I understand non-self according to what I have got from Ajahn Brahm, I meditate because I have no choice.
Yep.
I like that idea.
Yep.
But meditation is impermanent.
Yep.
So if I don't have desire to meditate, I will give it up.
Yep.
So having desire to meditate doesn't contradict non-self. Is that true?
I don't know how that logically follows, but I think I get what you're. I think I get the question. So there's a way we can think about this thing, is that, and it gets to somewhat the relational aspect I was talking about before, is how we're relating to either a self or not self. You know, if we're relating to the self in this way of like, well, you know, I want to practice, and this is a useful thing. But we're relating to not self, it's like, well, everything's not self, so I shouldn't bother practicing in this kind of way. That's obviously not a useful way to go about understanding either self or not self. And so, you know, but then we could say, well, everything is just the instantiation of dependent origination. It's all just causes and conditions. Then, and those causes and conditions are such that, you know, essentially that I have the, you know, this conscious, this conscious experience, this thing has the requisite causal conditions to be such that it will practice meditation. I'm not saying that there's a self or that there's no self in that thing. Just this causal structure that is here now has the requisite qualities that it will practice meditation. Is it making the choice to do that? Well, it has the requisite causal conditions that make that particular kind of choice to practice meditation. It does not have the requisite causal conditions that say meditation is a waste of time. So if we look at it from a perspective of causal structures with particular kinds of constraints, then I think we can say, yeah, the not self still fits in with a kind of push to meditate in this kind of way. If this causal structure with this particular kind of constraints is such that it will be inclined to meditate, it will meditate. If it's not, it won't. The idea is that we have this kind of boundary of constraints that we can't really go beyond. So I have, at the moment, I have the causal constraints is that I don't speak Japanese. Like, so I can't think in Japanese. Maybe because I didn't grow up in Japan, I haven't ever learned to speak Japanese, I haven't got the requisite causal qualities that allows me to think and speak in Japanese. Now, but I have the causal constraints of language. I have enough cognitive capacities where maybe I could learn Japanese. And so if it was such, for some reason I moved to Japan, and I like Japan, Japan's a cool place. If I were to move there, I could probably learn Japanese. But at the moment, I don't have those kinds of qualities. So I think there's an element there, if we think about the causal structures that we... Oh, and just to finish that last Japanese language thought off. I also... But it's beyond my constraints that it's beyond my constraints that I can become an Olympic athlete. Nah, it's like it's not happening. It's not happening. I'm going to become an Olympic. So that is something that is beyond my constraints. So I can't become an Olympic athlete unless an Olympic athlete is sitting. I could probably do that. So that's something beyond the constraints of this causal structure. So and hopefully I haven't gone too far off course with this, is that not self can fit into the desire to meditate because the particular causal system has the requisite causal conditions and is within the constraints of such that it does meditate, and not that that meditation is something outside of its constraints. That's confusing, but it's. I think that sort of answers your question. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe just confuse you even more.
Thank you, Ajahn, for clarifying. Any questions from the room? Go ahead.
Yep, I've got one.
Yep.
I've got a question about non-self and attachment.
Yep.
So a couple of days ago, I got really upset about how out of control my body is.
Yep.
How much I can't control my body.
Yep.
And all I could do was I'm not my body. That's the that I could sort of think about. But attachment and aversions I can understand, and I can understand being angry and jealous and sad and grief. About in relation to why I would be upset about not having control of my body. But is that third one, ignorance, or the three poisons I've heard it referred to, attachment, aversion and ignorance.
Yep.
Could I be looking at it differently and going a bit more into non-self and thinking, because I've sort of never thought about non-self, I've always gone to the attachment to how things should be.
Yep.
But if I looked a bit more deeply, or maybe, the book sounds really interesting, or something I could read or think about or say to kind of come to terms more about.
So sorry, just let me clarify, just so I understand. So is the question something of usually the way that you've related to your experience is this kind of either attachment or is it a kind of aversion?
Yeah, totally.
Is it bringing up
Correct.
one of those two things? And that's helpful in some ways, it's also limited in other ways. And so is there another way that you can think about this relation to either self or not self that is helpful and is the kind of this one of the three poisons, and we call it delusion, avidya, delusion. I tend to call it misrepresentation of reality or misperception of reality. Is that another way to go? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, cool. I think it's potentially it's a combination of all of it. It's what works at that particular time. So if it's, say for example, it is something of okay, I have an aversion towards my body because I have 3 bulging discs and a pinched nerve in my back and it sucks and I can't sit here for long and all these kinds of things, and I have a massive aversion to this thing, that's the thing you work with then. If I have this attachment of, I like it when people are this kind of way to me and people should always be this kind of way to me, we have that attachment there in that way. Or desire for that thing. Yeah, that's the thing we work at that time. if we just have this kind of, we're misperceiving reality in this kind of way. Well, yeah, I really think I am Kevin, and Kevin has the most important experience in the world, and I'm a solipsist, and everyone else is not important, and it's only me, I'm the only one that's important. That's when you work with that kind of misrepresentation of reality. So we can use all these different things. But yeah, sometimes attachment and aversion is so strong that, you know, we just get pulled around by it. And we do sort of get lost in it. So I think that's why if we have like an arsenal of tools that we can use and we can relate to it in different ways, then this is the thing that actually becomes very practical and helpful for us in our lives. The only thing about thinking about things in terms of avidya, of a kind of delusion, it's very like cognitive and top down. It's a kind of a reasoning way that you can think about existence, and that's good in some instances. So say for example somebody's annoying you, and you can go, well, this is just a bunch of aggregates coming together, and like, what am I really angry at? Like I see this thing as a formulation, but it's not really the way it is. So it's a kind of a top-down, rationalist, cognitive way. But that actually can help. It can help sometimes, but it requires a bit of work. The kind of the intractable problem with avidya and delusion is that we're always, if we take the Buddhist position seriously, we're always, unless we're enlightened, we're always operating out of delusion. So you're using delusion to get out of delusion, which is, it's not fair. It sucks. So we can use this thing. We can try to use it, but there's going to be limited. So I think, if you can find, so essentially what we're looking for is what we call in Buddhism is ubaya, a skillful means. So again, in the way I think about these things, it's like, do we have a skillful means to relate to the self, or do we have a skillful means to relate to not self? Or what is an unskillful means to relate to the self, or an unskillful means to relate to not self? I think that's, for me, that's a kind of, and then within that, you can have so many different things. So, but yeah, the kind of recognition or the reflection on avidya, I think it's a good thing. So yeah, you can use that.
And just the name of the book again?
Losing Ourselves by Jay Garfield. Yeah, great book. Nice guy as well. So.
Thanks, Ajahn. Just the last question for online. In a monastery, there is many monks, lay people, visitors, celebration, etc. Is that chaotic?
Good question. Yeah, definitely. And it depends on the size of the monastery, and depends on the size of the ceremony. Anybody that and look, so like some monastics like it, but you asking me, I can't stand ceremonies. I don't like them. I get really kind of I don't want to do this thing. But you just have to do them. So yeah, it can be chaotic. It can be, and it's like anything. You live in life, and you have to go to work, and you have family, and it can be, general life is chaotic, and it's no different in a monastery. People sort of have this idea as, being in a monastery must be idyllic, and it's all peaceful, and you're all nice to each other, and all these kinds of things. And it's like, so I could tell you some stories, kind of thing, but I don't want to ruin your faith. Don't want to ruin anybody's faith. But just this element that even if you're in a monastery, you're in the world, you're in existence, and it's very, very similar. Monastics have a lot of duties, they have a lot of responsibilities. You have to deal with a lot of people. It's not that much different to having to deal with the responsibilities of work and a family, and work functions that you have to go to. It's like a ceremony for us. It's like, oh God, I don't want to go to this function at work. this after dinner drinks or whatever it is, and this stupid function for work. I don't want to go to. It's like monastics. Most of the time, that's what we think about ceremonies. It's like, God, I don't want to do it, but I got to do it. I just have to do the thing. It's fine. Like so yeah. I think the sign of somebody that is just well adjusted is that, you know, even though you don't want to do it, and even though it is chaotic, you still do it. You just do the thing, and it's fine. Don't complain about it. You don't complain. Oh, it's so chaotic in the monastery, and all the monks and nuns are all terrible and they're all bad. It's like, you just get on with it. That's what you sort of have to be like in life as well. It's like, okay, well, yeah, look, work sucks. It's terrible. Like the people in my family, they're annoying, and all my friends are just they're always asking me for things, but I have to deal with it. You know, I deal with the people around me, and that's just sort of how it is. So is it chaotic? Yeah, but everything, basically samsara is chaotic. So yeah, monasteries are in samsara, monastics are in samsara, so it's all chaotic.
Thank you so much, Ajahn. And thanks again for the
problem.
talk today.
No problem.
Now I'll pass back on to Sweet Juice for the announcement.
Right on 10:45, Ajahn.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ajahn, for the talk today. Just a couple of announcements here. Just on the Kalyanamitta cleaning day, thank you so much to everyone that participated in this. I think everyone could see how really beautiful the BSV is out, in particular outside, because we had some really poor weather for about 2 consecutive months, and cleaning that up has been fantastic. So just want to remind everyone, the facilities here at the BSV are maintained thanks to the generosity of our community, who give their time, energy and material resources so we can all benefit from it. If you'd like to join the team, there will be another opportunity on the 25th of August, which will be on the last Sunday of the month. So we run the Kalyanamitta cleaning days on the last Sundays of the month. Your help will be greatly appreciated, and as you can see, it makes a really significant difference, so thank you. Also today, the monthly lay discussion is on. That's on the first Sunday of the month, and that'll be at 12:30 p.m. In the library. And this is an open forum to discuss topics of the Dhamma and learn the Buddhist teachings from a group of knowledgeable Buddhist practitioners. And what better topic than today's one? So City Zen, they've got an announcement here. I'm going to pass it on to Arvin to promote one of the events.
Oh, yeah. So again, my name is Arvin, and I'm from the Citizen. It's a youth group associated with BSV, and we're aged around 17 to 35 years old. So we are having an event next Saturday, which is on 10th of August. And this is the title of this activity is Youth Focus and Flow. And it's basically meditation, a meditation session together. And it will be in the Melbourne CBD, Grand Apartment, 560 Lonsdale Street. And it will be around 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. afternoon. And yeah, if you want to have more information, you can visit our Instagram, which is BSV_citizen. Citizen _BSV. So yeah, see you there if you are interested in our events, meditation together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Arvin. And it's also in our newsletter as well. There's a link to it as well. Okay, so for this week's teaching program, so tomorrow night, Ajahn Sādaro will be conducting the Monday night guided meditation. Tuesday night will be at 7:30 again. As usual, Sandeep Karki will be doing the layperson-led meditation. Make meditation a healthy habit runs from Monday to Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Melbourne time. Their 20-minute monastic-led guided meditation sits on Discord, our online platform. New Day, New Mind, which is a daily meditation group which you can join anytime between 4 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. Melbourne time on Discord, and Ajahn Nando joins the room between 6 and 6:30 a.m. Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. Next week's teaching program. So next Sunday we'll be having Venerable Thich Phuc Tan giving a talk at the BSV here. It'll be the second time he's giving a talk here. And then on Monday night, Ajahn Sādaro will be doing the guided meditation. So that's it for announcements. Thank you very much, Ajahn, and thank you everyone.
Cool. And as a sneak announcement, Discover Buddhism is coming back soon. It's coming back in start of October. So the Friday night sessions, these are aimed at people that are new to Buddhism or new to meditation. So we're going to be starting that up again in October, I believe. So yeah, if you know anybody that's interested in learning how to meditate or learning about Buddhism, the Friday night sessions, they should be quite good for them, and that will start in October. So with that, we'll pay respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and we'll go and get something to eat. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivade Soakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Very good. Okay, so if you want to make your way over, we'll do the rice pinda butter and have some lunch.